Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our discussion of Buried Seeds by Donna Meredith. And we are going to be diving a little deeper into the second part on some of the topics that take place in the story. We're going to start out talking about women's health issues. And as a man, I'm gonna announce that and then take a step back. Phyllis, you were particularly interested in this part of the story. Do you want to talk some about what you found captivating about the women's health issues?
Well, number one, I think we have forgotten how little women were allowed to know about their own health and their own bodies in the days when this novel begins. And I actually saw some of this later in the 50s when I was a nurse, that women were not allowed to make their decisions sometimes. They couldn't even decide if they were going to have a hysterectomy, for example, because that was a sterilization procedure, and the husband had to authorize it for some religious faith. And so it's just amazing to me to see this look back at how healthcare was, and to know how much we've come forward in that. It's sort of like suffrage in its own way. And I don't know if Donna would want to sort of summarize it. I don't know if we've given our fair share to the summary of what this book entails, the time period it covers, or the elements. Would that be helpful or not?
Healthcare figures strongly in both Angie's and Rosella's stories. In Angie's story, it figures because they need better healthcare for the family, better insurance, and that's why she's so motivated to take part in the teacher strike. She has not only a grandchild with hearing issues, but her stepfather is dealing with dementia. Her mother in the past has dealt with cancer, and so she needs to get better health care. In Rosella's case, the health care issues are very crucial. Her mother dies in childbirth, so that comes into play. The reason that this story took off in the direction it did, I went to a lecture back probably a decade ago at Florida State on women's health care issues and how they've changed. And in the early decades of the 1900s, women were dying mostly from diseases like tuberculosis, childbirth, and STDs. So I wanted to make those an important part of Rosella's story. The Comstock laws forbade women to get information about their own bodies. They were not allowed to know about STDs, and this is what happens to Rosella. She gets an STD and her doctor refuses to tell her about it, just wants to treat her for the disease without letting her know what's going on or why her baby is ill. And she does lose this child.
The things that surprised me in the book, and I won't tell how it figures into the book, I don't want it to be a spoiler, but I had forgotten the old wife, well, it wasn't an old wives' tale, old husband's tale about how sleeping with a virgin would cure syphilis. Oh boy. I'm glad we learned something different.
Yes, I uncovered that in research, and that was a shocker. A lot of the things that I uncovered about that early time period were surprising to me.
I was surprised when they come to arrest. I didn't know about the Comstock laws, or I didn't remember or know about dispensing birth control information as being illegal. So I was surprised when the police came to arrest Rosella for that.
I thought we might talk a little bit about some more of the research that I did. First, I researched the early 1900s, their dress and the way they behaved. And then I thought I would focus on Ohio Valley pottery, which we collect. Instead, though, I ended up researching the pottery made by women in San Francisco at a sanitarium for TB patients called Arequipa. This pottery was one of a kind, and it sounded like the right thing to do for my character. Another thing I had to research was the earthquake, because that's the reason many women ended up with tuberculosis. They inhaled a lot of debris and smoke from the earthquake and the aftermath of fires. While I did research, I was fascinated to learn that women in the West won rights long before the rest of the country. So I pushed Rosella off her love seat and had her marching in the streets of San Francisco. Susan B. Anthony visited San Francisco numerous times, so she plays a role in the story. Also, I learned about a San Francisco librarian who was fired so that a less qualified man could have the job. And women protested. That included Miss Anthony, who came to San Francisco to join the protests, and I worked that protest into the story as well. Even for the modern part of the story, I had to do research by interviewing teachers and using a book called 55 Strong with essays by many West Virginia teachers who participated in the strike.
Thank you, Donna. That's I was really interested in how the research, portion came into play. I was wondering if we could discuss a little bit about some of the while we're talking about women's health issues, some of the aspects of the dynamics between women in this story. There's women who both support and undermine each other in this story, with Nellie supporting Ro and Angie and Mackenzie having the rivalry. You want to talk a little bit about how those characters came to play those roles in your story?
Nellie is a big support for Ro, but that's not the only relationship that's going on between women in that time period. Nellie becomes like a family member. She's a sister, practically, or like an older sister, an aunt. But on the other hand, there's some women who are quite undermining of her. Alexandra Underwood is one that undermines her. There's a lot of rivalry. And I think this is characteristic of groups of women when they get together, that sometimes they support each other and sometimes they are a backstab. And that's Alexandra's role in here. Now, Mindy Kennison was one of the most fun for me to create, and I honestly didn't know what she was going to do until she finally did it at the end. And I don't want to give away too much of the story there, but Mindy is very multidimensional, and she is very much like Susan B. Anthony in that she is driven. She is a businesswoman, and she is not going to give up her independence, even though she looks all fluffy and feminine. And that makes people underestimate her and think they dismiss her as just a pretty little girl. But she is a very clever businesswoman and marketer of her father's gallery. He owned an art gallery that she inherited. So I had a lot of fun with that. Now, the sibling rivalry in the present day is a lot of fun too, creating Angie and Mackenzie, her sister. Their rivalry is typical of siblings, I think, who are close in age. They're always poking at each other and one's trying to be better than the other at something. But that dynamic changes once the outside world is attacking Mackenzie. Then Angie is all behind her and supportive. And Mackenzie does the same for Angie. She, goes with her to the teacher strike in Charleston and helps her organize Twitter and things she's not that familiar with.
One thing I really liked about the sibling relationship was the demonstration of the misconstruing of a childhood incident, so that one child grows up thinking she caused some real harm when she really didn't. But that was her take on it. And how often children do that? They blame themselves for something that they had really no control over. I thought that was a beautiful piece of writing.
Right, and that was related to the issue of adoption, which it seems to me not many books deal with, but the issue of adoption was one of the minor themes anyway in this book.
Exactly. And the grandmother's take on which child she would favor, the adopted child or the biological child, or if she would favor either. Interesting grandmother.
Yeah.
Even though it had a smaller part to play, maybe overall, the theme of adoption is very strong strand that connects,
Right.
of course, Angie and Ro, and it's what brings the whole story together. And as someone who's in the process of adopting 2 children, there's very much to be said about having all of the pieces that you came from. In this case, for Angie, it connects her strength to her ancestors' strength, and that's a really powerful point. But I also wanted to point out that that there was this theory that we had during training that said, a person can't have peace without having all of their pieces. And for Angie, this gives her a huge piece of the puzzle. It adds to her story, and it helps develop her character.
So family is not just your biological family, but all the people who really love you and have your back.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for sharing your time with us today and giving us an inside perspective on this story. Phyllis or Eddie, do either of you have anything else about the story that you'd really like to comment on or discuss before we wrap up?
No, I just like it as a continuation of Donna's project, which was even her mysteries have social issues that come up and that are woven so well into the stories. They don't just sort of stick out like they're stuck in and don't really fit the story. They're woven in.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of you reading the book and taking the time to discuss it.
Phyllis, any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Well, one minor thing occurs to me. Donna is donating the profits from this book to several places, and one of them is to Fairmont State University, who happened to have suffragettes on campus when their suffragettes were doing things. And my husband's mother was there, and I believe she was a member of the suffragettes. I can't prove that. We do have a suffragette pin.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's really a treasure.
Yeah, and a letter. We have letters too about it. So it's really interesting to know that the family was involved.
And that it was taking place here just like anywhere else across the country. I think that's an important aspect to add as well. Well, thank you to Dr. Pendarvis. Thank you to our literary historian, Phyllis Wilson-Moore. And thank you to Donna Meredith, who's the wonderful author of not only this book, but so many others that shine positive light on Appalachia. I hope that folks will join us again as we discuss the next novel in the series. So if you enjoyed this, please share it with friends. Please encourage them to read the book, and please join us again as we discuss other topics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.